How is everyone doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you. Today, I'm joined by a strength and conditioning coach, having worked in elite sport for a number of years, as well as being a consultant to the PGA European Tour. Today, I am joined by the one and only William Wayland. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. How are you? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world?
So with obviously with COVID and everything, we're what a year now. It's a year today, actually. I think was the people marked it today. So out of the past 9 months, out of the past 12, really my training facility, Powering Through Performance in Chelmsford, has been closed. So we've had to adapt and make do as best we can for our members, and also for our clients and for the athletes we consult for. So it's been an interesting year or so. It's and hopefully one that we won't have to repeat if everything works out the way it's currently heading by the looks of things.
Yeah, definitely. And how have you, because obviously it's been, a little bit of a, weird year for a lot of people. How have you sort of adapted from, being in the gym to then maybe doing a lot more online or changing how you work? Has it been a big change, or how have you found it?
Mhm. So for us, a lot of our bread and butter is our membership for the gym. So we've had to accommodate our members as best as possible, and I'll be honest, gym memberships have taken a hit, and I think they have across the board for everybody. So the remaining members we have left, we have to cater to them, Zoom workouts, that type of thing. We've been helping them build home gyms and stuff like that. So we had to adapt for those guys. Because one of the allowances we do have is that elite athletes, who I work with a few, are still allowed to train in the facility. Initially, they weren't, and then once they figured out what the rules were of the game, of this whole lockdown restrictions, so elite athletes are still able to train, providing they can kind of justify that. So I work with a good few guys who've still been able to carry on training, and the other things we've been doing is working consultancy work for various sports teams, organizations, things like that. And the other thing is, because we host a number of physiotherapists at our facility, the physiotherapy is still allowed to go ahead. So it's not been completely closed down, not completely, but definitely had a big impact on our profits for this year. So it's going to hurt, and it'll continue to hurt, I'm sure, a little bit longer. But I'm tired of people saying it, but this is a unique circumstance, and again, hopefully one we won't have to repeat.
Yeah, it's one of those phrases. I found myself saying the new normal quite a lot, and I kind of get sick of saying it and want something else, say something in a different way, but it kind of keeps creeping out every now and again. But obviously, a couple of weeks until the gyms reopen. Have you got some new plans in place, or is it back to normal? How are you feeling about the gyms getting back open?
We're actually feeling pretty optimistic. And it's funny, I saw some people from a large gym chain out flyering today, of all things. So clearly they're feeling optimistic as well. We don't see large gym chains as our direct competitor, but if they're feeling optimistic, then I think we can all probably take some confidence in that. So I'm thinking, because there's going to be so much pent up demand, hopefully we'll see a rebound. Those 3 months we were open, from like July, September, October, we saw an incredible increase in demand, which was terrific for us. So if we see a jump in demand like that again, hopefully maybe the next year might be a really, really good year for the fitness industry and for small gyms like ours as well. And this is the other thing that's changed quite dramatically, is that we picked up a lot of new members during that 3 month break, July through October, because people were downsizing and trying to then sort of also, make their fitness experience more qualitative, I guess you could say, because a lot of them came from big box gyms, your big corporate players, and they would kind of realize, well, wait a minute, I'm not maybe making use of all the stuff that they've got there, your sauna, your swimming pool, because you're paying for a lot of different stuff, really, especially if you're the type of person that's only really interested in going to a gym to lift weights. So we picked up a lot of people who I guess you could call enthusiasts, who were like, I want to refine my weight training experience a little bit more. So we picked up a few power lifters and Olympic weightlifters who were kind of sick of training at a big box commercial gym, and see the value in investing in a sort of small local independent facility where, I think in Essex, we've got some of the best equipment, particularly for power lifters and that, and for Olympic weightlifters, full competition sets, calibrated plates, competition standard equipment. So, for them, it's a massive boost. So hopefully, all things being well, we should be looking, pretty good, hopefully, once we get to reopen.
Yeah, cool. I think I've kind of seen a similar theme from, especially sort of being based in Leeds and knowing a couple of guys that are over in Liverpool and in the northeast and that sort of stuff. That there's been a similar trend of people going from sort of like the big box gyms where they are just sort of a number, if you like, coming into sort of the more independent and gyms, and either wanting that more like what you were saying, enthusiast, or the equipment more related to the powerlifting or weightlifting, but also the coaching side of things, rather than like the coming in and the wanting people's expertise and realizing that it's not just going on a treadmill or going on cross trainer for a little bit. There can be a little bit more to the training and the coaching side of things. So yeah, I agree. I think it'll be interesting sort of when things open up again, and if it follows that trend a little bit. So obviously I did a little bit of an introduction there, but for anyone listening who might not know your background in coaching, in training, obviously setting up powering through your facility in Essex, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Sure, no problem. So I guess I've been probably involved in the fitness industry and strength and conditioning for probably up to nearly 20 years now. I'm showing my age. And powering through's only about sort of 3.5, 4 years old. And we've been going great guns ever since we opened, which is terrific. And I was operating most of that as a private S&C coach, working with a lot of MMA fighters, those types of athletes, because combat sports is my background. So I worked with a lot of combat sports, and now I'm known for working with a number of UFC fighters, some of whom are currently active, which is great. And I also pretty well known for my work in golf. So I work with the PGA European Tour's Performance Institute. I've been doing that now for a good few years, and that gets me access to some of the best golfers in the world, which is a terrific work to do. I really enjoy that. Normally I'd be able to travel, all over Europe, which is normally a pretty good part of the deal. But obviously that's kind of been put on hold the past year. And yeah, I've been doing this for a while now, and we've set up a facility to cater to strength and conditioning. We work with a few athletes from sort of novel sports as well. Work with a superbike rider who's quite well known. And that sort of keeps me on my toes as well. We work with our local rugby team, and it's a good variety of work. And obviously the other stuff we do is we consult as well, which is great.
Oh, cool. And with the obviously,
hopefully that's pretty well rounded.
yeah, and obviously, I said in the, when we were setting up the podcast about, the content that you're putting out there, and I found it interesting and useful, and you mentioned there about your background working with combat sports athletes and golf and rugby players. Was that the plan, just to kind of train a variety as athletes? Or because I know for me, from leaving university and that sort of stuff, I kind of thought, I just want to coach rugby. I can't play as much rugby anymore, so I'm just going to focus on that side of things. But you can get to a point where maybe you can branch out a little bit. So was that always the plan, or what were your thoughts on that?
I think I've always wanted to train athletes. Something I stated a long time ago, over 23 years ago, something I wanted to do. I wasn't sure what type of form that would take. And I finished university, and I admitted recently on social media that every strength and conditioning job I ever applied for, I got rejected. I got rejected. But yet here I am working with some of the best athletes in the world. So because I thought, like a lot of guys, the answer was badge chasing. Apply for those jobs with those teams with the sexy badges, be it rugby, Premier League, whatever. Those were the jobs to have, And now I work for myself, and I have done for a long time. all I hear from guys who do those types of jobs, how much they hate it. So I guess I kind of dodged a bullet maybe there. And then what's weird is now I consult for some of these people as well, which is even funnier. But I had a stint in sports science education. I worked as a lecturer and a teacher, and it wasn't for me. That whole world of sports science teaching, the way it's taught, and the outcomes for the students, it wasn't for me. I did that for 2 years and decided I didn't like that. So people that can stick in academia, I think it takes a different type of mindset, but it definitely wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah.
So that kind of, go on.
No, sorry. What were you going to say?
No, I was just gonna say that I think that's a pretty good rundown. I've traveled an awful lot as well. I lived in South Korea for a while and tried my hand at a few different things, but it's always been strength and conditioning has always been the thing that I've come back to and I enjoy doing. So I've something else I said recently is I'm kind of best in the position I am because I'm I'm not very good at having a boss. The only boss I like is the athletes I work for. So that works for me.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And you obviously said there about sort of like the academic side of things. And I know sort of coming out of university and looking through journals and research and all that sort of stuff, I'll probably actually dive that into a little bit more with the monthly mass from Greg Knuckles, and I've probably got more into that side of things rather than being. I always sometimes felt at university it was like research and that side of things with everything, but then you start kind of go out and learn a little bit more the practical side of things and get dived into coaching and you learn a little bit more. And on a little bit of a tangent when you said there about applying for jobs for the with their fancy badges and that sort of stuff. I know for me, looking for internships, wanting to dive in and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try and get in there. Do you think that now you've got a little bit more freedom, or maybe not freedom, a little bit more time with the athletes that you work with? Because I know from guys that I know that work in strength and conditioning with sports teams, and from the little experience that I have, the time that you have with them is quite limited. Whereas with you having your own facility and working with a wide variety, do you feel like you have a little bit more time with them and you can get a little bit more out of them?
For sure, and because it's a highly qualitative experience, people are willing to pay more for that as well, which is obviously important. You make the athlete feel like they're the most important person, and it's the fact that because we're now developing into a full spectrum service where we are. So we've got our physios as well. We're doing a lot more sports science offerings on top of everything else we're doing. So it's that way we kind of cover all our bases, and the athletes feel very well looked after. And I think that's why we attract more, I guess, independent athletes and athletes that play solo sports. So, that's why we've got our fighters. That's why we've got our golfers. That's why we've got our superbike riders, because they all play sports where they're solo, and they can kind of they can then pick and choose who they want to work with, and that works out well for us. And we also get some athletes from team sports in their off seasons and stuff. They'll come spend time with us too. So yeah, it does vary a little bit from person to person, and yeah, it's definitely that qualitative experience is what we're really looking at offering for our clients.
Yeah, and you do find that it's a lot more because especially when you look at the only example is literally because I just saw it with the Six Nation finishing, is that a couple of the top level athletes have actually in their off season gone off and tried to find some expertise of getting faster or becoming a little bit more powerful or whatever it may be. But diving into sort of I know that was a little bit of a tangent there, but sometimes I just have to ask the questions that are on top of my mind. But going into the topics that I mentioned, setting up the podcast, and it was kind of because you've got an experience of working with quite a variety of athletes, the base level, building robust, resilient athletes across the board. I just kind of wanted to touch on what your definition of that is. What does that look like to you? Mm-hmm. And is there a common theme, working with athletes just across the board of, certain criteria that you need to hit, and what are you looking for on that?
Yeah, I guess it comes to the robustness concept is one that sort of I borrowed heavily from Nassim Taleb. and it's the idea that one is resistant to shocks. Those outsized stresses or shocks as they're represented. Sports environment is chaotic, and we have to gird the athletes as best we can against what I guess we would consider known unknowns, so to speak. We can always still have catastrophic problems or athletes get injured for whatever reason. You can't really do anything about that. That's just the nature of sport. MMA is a great example. You get an athlete who injures a limb or gets concussed or something. That's just the risk that they're willing to take on being involved in that sport. But from a physical training standpoint, I guess robustness speaks to having a solid foundation of physical literacy. You're able to solve a lot of physical problems. You have your movement patterns all down, so you know how to squat, you know how to hinge, you know how to push and pull, you know how to brace, load, and explode. And you're competent at sort of an array of movement patterns. And then once you have that foundation of physicality, that robustness, then you can start to optimize a system. And how that optimization looks will vary from athlete to athlete, because strength coaches shouldn't be precious. Most of the basic training we do with most athletes is all going to be pretty similar to one another. And it's getting over that idea, because a lot of people are very hung up on specificity, but I'm quite often of the opinion that most athletes aren't in a position to gain in specificity outside of their sport unless they've got a really well developed sense of physicality. And we see this problem in golf an awful lot in an attempt to specialize and be very specific in terms of their general prep on top of their already very specific sports training, when they don't have any real foundation of physicality. And that's why you put in golf fitness or golf strength and conditioning on Instagram, and you see some really fun looking. Don't get me wrong, some of the stuff you see looks fun, but if it's actually achieving a training effect, and golf, for instance, because it's easy to pick on, has been a great example of some of the more sort of avant-garde, wacky exercise selection. Other sports don't do it quite so badly, but golf is one of them. It's up there. Tennis is probably next as well. I've seen some good stuff out of tennis too. So if you fancy a laugh, go check those out. But and it's sort of in that case, what those guys are trying to have is they're trying to have their cake and eat it. So they think that they're able to optimize a system that the individual lacks robustness. So they're not really going to get an awful lot out of that training approach, because they don't have the requisite physical qualities that actually do help, say, golf. And they're trying to then do more specialization, and it's sort of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. And that happens in golf a lot, for example.
Yeah, with that, because obviously you said there about the being specific too soon. Do you think that the reason behind that is because obviously you need to be able to do those movement patterns, that base level of strength to them build on and get maybe more specific to your sport. But do you think from the coaching point of view that trying to be something different to try and especially for a lot of coaches that maybe aren't in a team environment or just working solely with that one area, to try and attract different athletes and think, right, this is a crazy new golf exercise that we've got, this is a fancy new grappling exercise for the combat athletes? Do you think they're just trying to stand out but then forgetting the fundamentals that you need to stick to?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case, and I've seen it in martial arts, and I see it in golf, the same thing in golf coaches as well. And because your martial arts instructor, for instance, you'll be with that person generally for a very long time. So there's a propensity to start to then look at that, get that person to look at as if they have all the answers. You look at them as if they have all the answers to the questions that you're posing, and it does depend somewhat on the coach. They're trying to be all things to their athletes, and in some instances that works out worse for the athlete. It's a good coach who quite often defers to other experts when it comes to areas of their limited knowledge, and I think partly some of it's born out of the unwillingness of perhaps coaches to turn around and say, I don't know. I think I don't know probably the three most powerful words you can employ as a coach in any respect, because it basically abdicates your responsibility for something, doesn't it? Whereas if you start then trying to imply that you've got the answer to a problem, you're in dangerous water, particularly if it's territory you're unfamiliar with. So it's basically a person who doesn't know an awful lot telling a person who knows nothing how to achieve an outcome. And that's why, and then people are going to start making jumps or abstractions, or worse yet, they start modeling off stuff they've seen or stuff that appeals towards their biases, I guess, which is the other thing, you know. But it's always the good coach that you know, I don't know, you know, and it's such an easy thing because it gives you you know, gives you that leeway to then allow you, both you and the athlete, to explore potential possibilities, you know, and that emission of you know, I guess, well, vulnerability, that you're willing to say, look, I don't have all the answers. I can't control everything that's going on here, you know, because part of the job is to allow the athlete their ability to express themselves however they wish. You know, once they've achieved a certain level of competence, they start to understand themselves better and know what they need to work on. Occasionally, particularly in golf, for instance, when we bring a level of objectivity to golf, because it's quite a subjective sport. Golfers are very focused on how they feel and how things look, and a lot of the time their golf coaches aren't really being objective with them, particularly about their outputs. So that's where, say, an S&C coach can step in, and we can do some you know, force testing, velocity testing, that type of stuff, and start giving objective answers to the questions they have. Because for instance, in golf at the moment, I don't know if you're particularly familiar, but speed has become a very quite a big topic, particularly club head speed and driving further, because, you know, all the evidence seems to dictate that if you can drive further, you can win more prize money. In particular, a fellow called Bryson DeChambeau, who's you know, doing very well at the moment, and he's pioneered, not particularly pioneered, but I think he's definitely sticking out in terms of someone who's completely radically changed himself physically. He's gained more weight, and then trying to focus on swinging the club as hard as he can, you know, employing sort of his own resistance training routine, somewhat you know, unique to him, but it seems to be working and getting the results he wants to aim for. And now there's a definite scramble in golf towards trying to be bigger, be stronger, and hit it further, because it all seems to lead to positive outcomes. And when I started working in golf, one of the things I established early on is we need these guys to train less like physio patients and more like you know, power athletes, more like a thrower, maybe something along those lines. So yeah, it's a case of making sure that the coach can get out the athlete's way, so to speak.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned there is, you know, when you said, oh, if a coach says, I don't know, and being able to work together with a coach and the athlete, rather than it being a dictatorship, because sometimes just saying, no, we're going to do this, and this is the only way we're going to do it. It might work for a handful of athletes, but then for the rest, it might not work from there. In terms of the like what you mentioned there, using the example of golf, of okay, so if we get bigger, we can produce more power, drive further, you know, get more prize money. And do you find that sometimes when it comes to having that, still keeping the fundamentals in mind, but you've got to change, I hope this makes sense, change the fundamentals that you've got to use for programming with the trends of what's happening with sport, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I guess it's one kind of follows the other, because suddenly now more golfers are very interested in gaining size and getting stronger. And it was interesting to see recently, Rory McIlroy turned around and said, "Oh, I've been trying to get faster for the past 5 months, but it affected the way I was playing, and it's not for me." Well, I kind of, you know, head in my hands was like, that's not the attitude to take. You know, he's always been sort of heralded as a guy who understands the relationship between trying to get stronger and trying to, you know, build a higher club head speed. Whereas all my guys that swing over 130 miles per hour, which is super fast, it's top percentile, have all been working at the whole process of doing this thing for years. Yeah. It's not a 3 to 5 month fix. It's a commitment to you know, something long term. And I think it's just that change in attitude, because what people perhaps don't respect about Bryson DeChambeau is he's been on this process now for a few years, and it's only manifesting itself now. And golfers definitely ascribe to a training approach, a coaching approach that's very much input output. So it's like, you know, let's try this new thing. You know, what are the short-term outcomes? It did make a difference, it didn't make a difference, and they're very quick to discard. And it's that sort of attitude of sort of last in, first out. So what's the new thing I added? How's my game going? It's gotten worse. Okay, that thing that I added's gone. And it's that type of attitude rather than ascribing to perhaps a long-term approach. So yeah, it can be a little bit like that. They're very conscious of making changes to anything they do because the sort of your form in golf is seen as a very fragile thing. And I'm trying to change that mindset. They see it as something that's sort of delicate and to be protected, whereas I'm all about, in comes the stress, try and affect some meaningful sort of maximal change. And this is where sort of maximal gains as a concept over, say, marginal gains, which a lot of the golf community are quite obsessed with. They think they need to tweak little things here and there to make a big difference over time. And so actually you're not training maximally. There's a lot of you're leaving on the table in terms of your approach.
Yeah, just on that, obviously, when you're saying about to be able to train maximally and cause stress, do you think that when it comes to the coaching side of things, from an athlete looking at the coach, that they feel as though they need to be doing more specific exercises and these crazy exercises, and then from a coach's point of view, still trying to get that base level, but making sure that they're still getting there, it's still going to improve their performance? That makes sense from both sides.
So I guess part of the issue is golf coaches will only gravitate towards things that I guess they understand. And again, it comes back to that question of being able to say, I don't really know enough about this. We need to either bring in some external help or some outside help. And it does depend. Some golf coaches might make the decision. Sometimes the athlete might make the decision on their own, because a lot of the time golfers function as their own performance manager. Which is unique. So other sports, obviously your coach will be with you all the time. Yeah. In golf, quite often that doesn't happen. These guys are often out on their own, and they'll go back and see their golf coach every now and again, because the golf coaching sort of operates on a private model as well. Only the very, very top level guys will have their coach travel with them regularly because they can afford to pay them to do that. Most of the time that doesn't happen in other sports. Whereas, let's say the MMA fighter, they're always going to have the same coach with them all the time. And I guess it's again that back to that point, the golf coach, it's perhaps a lack of understanding. Things are getting better. The education's getting better. England Golf has made a ton of effort to try and improve the situation of educating golf coaches to help them better understand why strength and conditioning can be so useful. Coming in with sort of very science-oriented approach, a very numbers-oriented approach, because golfers love numbers. So it's appealing to that sort of that notion that there's more we could do here, and you don't want to be the guy who's missing out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is, looking at and adapting to what the athletes are going to respond a little bit. So, taking a more science-based approach when it comes to golfers, and, looking at the numbers side of things. Just going on to the sort of like the programming and implementing a program and a coaching approach. Do you think that sometimes, because we've mentioned, through this, saying, I don't know, I'm not sure. And between the point of, finding out that, right, maybe I'm a little bit out of my depth, or I'm a little bit unsure, before, seeking out advice from someone else. Do you think that, and especially when we've spoken about these are the movements that we need to put in, this is the base level that we need. Do you think sometimes coaches are reluctant to make it too simple, to have that base level and then look at going out within that interim period?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah, so obviously we've mentioned about, right, we still need to squat and hinge and all that and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And if they're struggling with an athlete, to know how to develop that programming, do you think that some coaches try to go too crazy exercises rather than maybe reducing it a little bit and just going right back to the basics and keeping it simple? And then if that doesn't work and get the performance outcome that they want, then looking for help and saying, yeah, actually we've tried this and this isn't going, swinging from both ends of the spectrum. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is where being objective is super important. So we've got objective standards for like strength and vertical force production, for instance, in golf. So if you take someone that's been trying, say, a very specific approach, they've been doing their they've been doing their cable wood chops, their Bosu ball single leg stuff, and that they call that their strength and conditioning. Then what you do is you take them and say, look, we're going to test you objectively. We're going to test your mid-thigh pull your isometric mid-thigh pull, and we're going to test your vertical jump impulse or vertical jump. And we can compare that to other golfers we've got on record. There's been research done, so we've got plenty of data that we can pull on, and basically say, right, well, look, your stated aim is you want to build your club head speed. You've been doing this approach that you've currently been doing for however long. Has your club head speed improved at all? And quite often the answer is no, it hasn't. And so, well, you've been trying this for 1 or 2 years. You've not seen any objective difference. Why are you still doing it? And obviously, quite often it's a case of, well, I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it wasn't really doing a lot for me. That's why I'm here to see you. So it's like, okay, well, let's test you objectively. You test them and you go, well, look, this is what your strength is like. This is where it needs to be. And here's the relationship between strength and club head speed. And you basically break it down for them so they can objectively understand, well, this is where I'm lacking. This is what I need to work on, because most of them would never have done any sort of max strength testing before, and probably not particularly well informed of the relationship between maximum strength and the ability to achieve high club head speeds. On the other hand, if you've got a golfer, and these are a minority, these are my guys, golfers who are very strong, who then perhaps can start to dial down into specific strength drills that can help them eke more out of their potential. So for instance, my more advanced guys who are like, for golfers, we're talking double body weight back squats, 2.5 times body weight trap bar deads, 1.5 times body weight bench. And I hate the term strong for a golfer, but that's pretty strong for any athlete, So we've got guys like that. And it's a case of, well, okay, we've kind of tapped the well, so to speak, from a max force relationship. We need to now perhaps look at what we can do to improve specific strength in certain positions, or how we can try and optimize your movement velocity or movement speed. And that's when we then start looking, well, this is where we go back the other way and start going, well, what about all this specific application? What stuff seems to actually make a difference, and what stuff is just a waste of time? And that's where, if you look on my Instagram, a lot of ballistic work, jumps, med ball work, the basics of ballistic training, and then some specific stuff in terms of, well, can I put some constraints here? What happens if I elevate the lead leg? What if I sort of band tether someone when they're doing their med ball throws? Different ways of trying to strengthen certain positions. So for instance, we can take the guys and get them to test their ground force data. And if they're not pushing through their lead leg enough, we can set up a mid ball throw, perhaps where we add a plate under the foot or something that forces them to push more through their lead leg. So you can start then trying to apply sort of very specific application in terms of that stuff. And we've done similar stuff with some of the MMA guys as well. And you can see some of the videos I put up with Corey McKenna of her doing like the contrast stuff of her doing like med ball throws, jammer throws, and then into like me applying a little bit of a shove and pushing her off a low box, and then she's springing off the floor and throwing a lead jab or a right hand, just to help improve her relationship with the ground, from a sport specific context. But the point is, she's done tons of strength and conditioning work prior to this for years and years and years. Yeah. So we can tinker with things like that, and that's that tinkering that's important. The problem is, I guess, is people want to tinker first before having established a firm understanding of everything else that needs to come before it, and that's kind of the crossroads a lot of people get at. They want to do the cool, fun stuff or the tinkering first without respecting the stuff that comes before.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a good explanation for that, and it kind of goes on to because obviously everything that you've said there is about looking at what they're doing, some testing, seeing where they're at, and deciding what they need to work on, and like what you said there, tinkering. And one of the things that you actually put out, it might have been a couple of weeks ago, was all roads lead to Rome, which I thought was quite a good I thought that was a good quote, and then the explanation after it, and kind of moving more towards the direction that people are going with coaching. And we've said there about this is the best practices, if you like, obviously talking about how you've worked, but is there, because you see some people that are putting stuff out, and you mentioned about your social media, they'll see a one exercise and then, okay, so we're going to base everything around that. We're just going to cherry pick other exercises, or like what you mentioned about the athletes that you're working with, right? Well, we're just going to follow this exercise. At some point, will they get their athlete to where they need to be, or is it just a case of, actually, there's going to be a few more bumps here than this method?
So I guess the point of all roads lead to Rome. This is where again tinkering is important, but all roads leading to Rome is basically trying to avoid the relativistic cop out of saying whatever you want to call it. Another one would be different strokes for different folks, right? So it's again it's a relativistic cop out. That's why people use it. It's a way of saying I don't really know if my method's more efficient or better, but you have to accept it. And that's what it is basically. Is and don't get me wrong, because sports is so phenomenological, and we quite often get supreme athletes who succeed in spite of poor strength and conditioning practices, athletes who often succeed with good strength and conditioning practices, and then a lot of athletes in the middle, and it's just as a strength coach, you do want to try and steer a good mixture between objective and subjective approaches. You don't want to be totally objective because that takes some of the humanity out of what you're doing. On the other hand, you don't want to be so subjective you can't really pinpoint as to what it is that if your training is having any difference or not. Yeah. And this is where sort of a good coach learns to blur the line. And as the longer you work with somebody, the more trust you build with that person. They learn you'll be more subjective sort of by default. Initially, when I get a person in for the first time, it's all about the assessment and trying to get them to buy in and see what it is what we're trying to achieve. As you build a friendship with them, as you get to know the client over a long period of time, it becomes more subjective. So that conversation in the morning when you see them and like, how are you feeling today? You know that they're going to sort of give you a decent response. Whereas obviously when you start with them in the first instance, you ask them how they're feeling, quite often they're just like, I'm fine. And it's like, well, that's not the answer I want. But you learn to build that communication. And as you do keep doing your objective testing, but it becomes less important, particularly over a very long period of time, because an athlete will eventually establish a sort of objective baseline that they're comfortable with. And it does depend on the sport. Obviously, stopwatch sports are different because they depend on output. Whereas, let's say, an MMA fighter, yes, you want things to be maintained at a certain standard from their physical standpoints, but there's the phenomenology of being a good technician at your sport, having good tactics as well, that all make a difference, something that strength and conditioning can't really influence. And the same is true for golf. What we're doing is probably going to have pretty minimal effect on how they putt. You're staring down a difference between a putt that's worth 100,000 pounds or a putt that's worth 10,000 pounds. Some guys find themselves in situations where it means a drop down the scoreboard of 10, 20 places if they mess up. That there's not a lot we can do to train that type of thing. So it's just, I guess, having respect for the phenomenology of sport is super important as well. You can't discount that stuff, and as a strength coach, you can't be as arrogant as to think that your training intervention is going to make all the difference, and that's the struggle a lot of strength coaches struggle with, because you've got to be able to promote yourself and be proud of what it is that you do and the difference you could potentially make. But at the same time, you can't be so arrogant as to assume that you're the significant difference. You can obviously set things up in a certain way and give athletes the physicality they need to do their sport, but there's so much other stuff that goes into it that you can't be so sure that the trainer for X athlete is the best trainer in the world. At the same time, there's probably some guy struggling away at a high school, who's doing the best he can with a bunch of kids that they've never done any strength and conditioning before.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to you said it at the start of the chat of the only boss that you want to be working with is the athlete. It's just one small part of what's going on, because ultimately they're the person, they're the athlete that's going out and performing, and everything that you do in the gym is just there to help give them the tools to be able to perform on the day. Do you think, because you mentioned there about as you build a relationship with an athlete and seeing them on a morning, how you doing, that conversation grows a little bit more, and there's probably more so in sort of like the strength and conditioning world of rather than looking at going to teams that have a good reputation, but trying to get as many qualifications sort of under your belt. So, right, I'm a weightlifting coach, I'm a powerlifting coach, I'm a whatever else, and thinking that these are the methods, it's the certificates that they've got, rather than actual developing skills we chatted about at the start of actually learning in the gym and being able to develop those relationships. Do you think the thinking that, right, I need all these letters, I need all these certificates behind my name, rather than actually being able to have that reputation of being able to work with athletes?
Yeah, I guess it's a big struggle for those coming into the industry. I've got plenty of certificates. I actually posted about a certificate I picked up today, which is a certificate in golf health and performance. You know, it definitely was educational. I learned some stuff about disability golf. Is it going to fundamentally change the way I do my job? Not really, but it's definitely I'm definitely a little bit better informed when it comes to certain types of athletes. You know, and but people collect certificates, they do things like that, and they think that it's easy to do. And particularly with lockdown, there was a flurry at the start, if you recall, of people doing like Zoom conferences and all this type of stuff, and people just accruing stuff. And it's like the hard question then becomes is, has it made you any better? And there's not a lot for making you better than actually, you know, coaching people and or uh, showing that you're struggling with the question with struggling with the answers to the questions you're trying to solve. So I completely changed the way I approach social media a few months ago, and now I do these posts where I tackle questions I was probably struggling with 2 years ago in terms of my mindset and thinking. So I do a lot more training, sort of thinking and strategy posts, you know, sort of blended with posts about the methods we employ as well. So it's a very blended approach, but, you know, I integrate things like philosophy and stuff like that. And sort of some of the bigger questions I'm trying to answer when it comes to dealing with the conundrum of how to train people and the strategies we employ and the approaches and we utilize. And it's just being more open about that process, because goddamn, when I finished university, I used to bowl around like I had all the answers to all the questions. You know, I was a walking encyclopedia of sports science, and people would ask me a question, and I'd probably end up giving a ridiculously convoluted answer to it, you know, filled with lots of textbook words. At the same time, you're not engaging with the athlete that you're working with when you do that. And don't get me wrong, when you finish university, that represents your formative understanding of how everything works. Yeah. You've then got this painful experience of the next 10, 15 years of, you're not unlearning it, but you're in effect learning how these concepts work in the real world, how much of it you actually need and how much of it bears no relevance to what it is you're actually doing. You know, like for instance, I think of the stuff I did at university, you know, VO2 max testing, blood lactate testing. I've only maybe done a handful of VO2 max tests since then, but I've had to use a university to use the equipment to do so. We can't do it in our own gym, and I haven't done any blood lactate testing since then ever. I understand what it is and how it works, but, you know, for most of the athletes we work with, most of them don't need that type of stuff, you know, and even the ones that are a super elite level, the question then becomes, is do they still really need that type of stuff? You know, and it's just learning to let some of that stuff go. But, you know, obviously, you know, you come out and you're super keen to demonstrate your knowledge and demonstrate your understanding. Occasionally, I have spats on Twitter and Instagram with people who you know, come from that type of world, because I'm willing to defy research occasionally with some of the stuff I do. You know, because my actual experience of coaching people, and obviously they've got their hierarchy of understanding tree and personal anecdotal experiences at the bottom as far as they're concerned. But what you need to understand eventually, it's not a pyramid of understanding. It's actually kind of like a network of nodes of things connecting to each other and how they relate to one another. Because, you know, occasionally you'll see coaches do stuff that have you scratching your head. At some level, you need to obviously be able to objectively justify it, but at the same time, you know, you've got to respect the whole subjective element of what it is people may be doing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, you know, I wanted to, you know, have the opportunity to chat with you, because I think there's a lot of I know from me, you know, since I've started coaching, since you know, leaving university, and you have all these grand ideas of, yeah, I'm going to do all these tests like what we did in the labs and, you know, be able to use it. But realistically, you know, in the majority of especially the independent gyms, you're not going to be able to do that. You've kind of got to make best of the situation that you've got, and I feel like all the information out there on the programming, on the periodization, on being able to get people stronger and all that sort of stuff is out there. And being able to speak to coaches such as yourself and looking what they do, there's not a massive amount of the variety of there, because, you know, it's always do the fundamentals. This is the baseline that you need to do. And then, like what we've chatted about today, there's that sprinkling of, well, actually, I'm going to give this a go, which is just on the fly in the gym, seeing it, how it works, right? Well, this has worked with which I think sometimes from the research side of things and the science side of things, they sometimes forget that it's like, I did this, but it was just with my athletes. Like, it's not a research study, and I want to say this is 100% what needs to be done with everything across the board.
Yeah, I think it's people get stuck on the whole. It's the idea of precision versus significance, right? So you can the example that's always used is the weight dropping from the sky, and it's like, oh look, there's an object falling for 9.8 meters per second, and then there's another guy going, look out. And it's the juxtaposition between those two things, and I guess part of the art of being a strength coach or being a sports scientist is being able to reduce things to what is the essence, what is the fundamental thing that's most important that we're trying to get out of what it is that we're trying to do. And Twitter and things doesn't help because there's an overwhelming obsession to be right, and not really hear people out. At the same time, we don't want to open the door to the wacky, goofy stuff that we see that goes on. And to right, people are starting to challenge that type of stuff, which is important. You've got to challenge things like that. But on the other hand, you've got to sort of, I think it's Vizzy Andre that says, when it comes to dealing with new ideas, close the door but open the windows. So be willing to entertain stuff, even if it's logically absurd. I did a post recently talking about giving the devil its due and how it can help you learn things, and it's like, well, a good example is instability training, for instance, which has always been super popular and comes back and goes, and certain sports won't let it go. Tennis and golf kind of won't let it go. And we occasionally see like off-season videos, right, of what wide receivers standing on Bosu balls with people throwing things at them and all this type of stuff. And it's like, well, rather than just go, instability training is rubbish, we can go, well, what is the question these guys are trying to answer? Well, they go, well, okay, we're trying to look at stability. It's like, okay, let's take a look at stability. And what's the essence of stability? Well, we know now that it's very context specific. So, and balance is very context specific. If we hadn't have asked the question in the first place, we wouldn't have had that answer to that question, and that's why it's important occasionally to entertain the ideas of people that kind of piss you off. And that's kind of important, so what is the essence of it that they're trying to do? For instance, great example, my friend Keir went and flat raked Joel Seedman over the coals very recently. I don't know if you listened to that podcast. It was
I did actually, yeah.
it was good. And what he didn't take him to task over, which is something I'm very familiar with, is I know it was about sprinting, but it's about like Joel's application of eccentric isometrics, for instance, because I'm kind of considered the triphasic guy, respect to Cal Dietz, but I'm considered, probably obsessed with the method because it's what I utilize most. But I'm obviously very familiar with eccentrics and isometrics, and even Joel's eccentric isometric method doesn't make sense from a training standpoint, because by trying to merge the two things together, you ruin the quality of both of them. Whereas the way I train eccentrics and isometrics, for instance, I separate them and approach them very intensively and very, very qualitatively. And for instance, we know now with research growing that eccentrics probably actually, if you want to get a meaningful training effect, need to be trained at 90% or plus, load. And he's not doing that when he's doing the stuff he's doing. So, if anything, he's having a potentially deleterious training effect, but nobody's had that discussion with him yet. But it's an example of stuff like that, and people not being afraid to kind of call people out occasionally. It's just, it needs to be constructive. That's the only thing. It needs to be constructive. It doesn't need to devolve in name calling or chest beating, So yeah, I know we're going off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, it was I forget the point I was trying to make now. So
that's why. Yeah, that's why it's called the chat, because I said at the but before we started recording, whichever sort of direction it goes. And I know from my point of view, especially being able to do this podcast, how I've developed as a coach and sort of my mindset on things, and trying to think about, because we have an internship program at the gym that I work at, and obviously over the last year there hasn't been that much coaching available. It's kind of been for the full-time staff members, and the interns are sort of like still trying to learn and jump in and and cover things. And I kind of think what would I like to have heard when I was first starting out, and exactly like what we've said there, being able to ask questions, maybe entertaining the idea of something that is completely different, still being able to look at it, but then say, yeah, do you know what? Actually, for the actual question that I'm trying to answer here, that isn't gonna work. And especially when you said there about the with Joel and Kia's YouTube. I didn't listen to the podcast. I watched it. I watched it on YouTube, but that was quite interesting because, and this is why I wanted to. We've probably delved a lot more into the coaching side of things. There's athletes that are obviously going and working with Joel, and it works, and it works for them.
Yeah.
But for the majority of things, sometimes people can maybe gravitate towards things that they don't totally understand just because they're replicating their methods. It's not necessarily, especially when Kia was talking about the sprinting side of things. The majority of the sprinting world would probably, agree with that, and that's the norm. But when someone's trying to do something different, they've still got maybe what they wanted out of it, but it isn't necessarily the norm for that.
Yeah, I think if Joel was guilty of perhaps stepping into a world he didn't fully understand, but then I think what rubs people up the wrong way is then turning into a sell, right? And it's trying to sell people on something. When I'm exploring new ideas, I'm usually not trying to sell people on things. I'm usually of the case, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but showing some vulnerability, basically saying, look, this is what I'm thinking. Can you let's walk through this, and maybe you can help me, and it's that approach. I think when I'm trying to solve problems is more what I'm doing these days than before. But just back to your point on interns, we've had interns come in and they've learned a lot about how things function in reality, like in terms of like compressing methods and things like that, which surprised them because some of the stuff we do does contravene research, and occasionally they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. But then funny enough, sort of more recent research has then validated the approach we're taking because of whatever reasons, because you have sort of sometimes intuition's not the worst thing to have. And I think that's the other thing, is because they're so anchored to a very rational objective approach, gut feelings and using intuition terrifies the shit out of them because they don't believe in their own authority or agency to make those types of decisions. At nearly 40, I'm more willing to make those types of decisions, and obviously that comes with experience. But we've had guys come in from internships. We usually have a university provide us interns as well, a local one, and they'll come in, and sometimes they decide that either S&C, what they thought it was, is not for them. And we've had that situation before. They decide to maybe, I'm going to do research instead. S&C isn't for me, because I think they sort of harsh realization of actually having to deal with people, is more than they realize, because you do have to be able to deal with people. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to deal with people, and it's just getting used to that social interaction of trying to solve people's training problems, but sometimes also dealing with their social issues as well. You'll occasionally have athletes who are problematic for whatever reason, it's sometimes hard to motivate people to get them to do what you want them to do if they're having a bad day and stuff. But it's just that sort of reality of I have to clean the toilets, I have to mop the floor, I have to, all the stuff people don't say. Suddenly a member comes over to you and asks for a t-shirt, well, you've got to be able to ring that up and sell that to them, so it's just stuff like that. Just because a lot of them love the idea of owning their own gym, and when I walk them through the reality of owning their own gym, so you have to be a good businessman as well. I'd rather have someone who had a basic understanding of training but was a good businessman than someone who has a terrific understanding of training and is a bad businessman, because I've seen that happen plenty of times as well.
Yeah, just I know with following this the coaching tangent side of things, but when you said there, especially about interns coming in and experiencing what strength and conditioning is, do you think that there is a I don't know whether this is the right word, but a hierarchy of what people think strength and conditioning is. Whereas, from the university, right, you're going to work in a team environment, or you're going to work with the, I don't know, Institute of Sport, or you're going to be working with a group of, and we're going to take all this data and you're going to follow this plan. Whereas actually, like what you said, there's the another level where it's right. Well, you're going to be in the gym, you're going to be making people's protein shakes. You're going to be, speaking how they feel, prepping the room for the weights, actually speaking to them and trying to change things around because someone's got a shoulder niggle or something like that. Do you think that maybe isn't explained when people think, right, this is the world of strength and conditioning.
Yeah, I think there's and this is something that's been leveled at the UK SCA as well, and at the way strength and conditioning taught is taught in universities. And we got to remember, again, showing my age, I come from a time when strength and conditioning wasn't taught at universities. My background's in applied sports science, so it was, and there wasn't even modules on strength and conditioning. It was something that wasn't. Those started appearing maybe a decade later, where suddenly it started popping up as a module. And it's like lucky buggers, I never had that. So I had to kind of learn on the ground from guys who'd been doing it longer than me. And I guess it's a case of these guys perhaps going on internships is a great idea. If you can get the time to do that. Not everybody can do that. But also in the trenches kind of training as well. Train yourself, eat in your own restaurant, so to speak. And that's something I talk about quite a lot, is you learn a lot from just training yourself. And but you get guys, we've had guys come in actually who've doing sports science degrees. They intern with us, and then it's a case of well, how much training experience do you have? And quite a lot of the time, some of them have almost none. And it's like, well, we can try and teach you the very basics, but we've got a group of youth, say junior athletes. Today, we're going to teach them how to do a hip hinge. Can you teach them the basics of that? It depends on where the athlete and where they are, as in terms of their own training journey. But if they train themselves, usually it makes life a lot easier, because they then what the challenge for them, I guess, is to then articulate what is implicit, and that process, because people will do deadlifts, they'll do squats, but then actually articulating how to do them to somebody else, you've got to go through the whole problem of trying to figure out the right language to use to get through to people. And that presents a whole set of problems on its own. Particularly you've got a group of 12-year-olds, you've just done your warm-ups, you've just done your plyos, and that's all monkey see, monkey do. But now you've got some kid trying to do a Romanian deadlift, and for whatever reason, he's just flexing through his spine like a question mark, and all your cues aren't working. And suddenly you've got to, think fast to try and fix this problem. And it's just, situations like that that for the intern are character building, because it teaches them that, well, here's a situation that's a problem. Like, what can I do? What can I do? And that's where, someone like myself will step in and say, well, try this restraint, try this, have you tried getting them holding a dowel behind themselves? Have you tried this or that? Have you tried, getting them to hinge their backs towards touching something behind them, things like that. And it's just stuff that you sort of learn over years and years of coaching people. And I definitely think there needs to be more of an exchange in terms of getting experienced hands-on coaches to do more work within, say, UK SCA. I've been to UK SCA conference a few times, and I've been bored to tears by yet another spokesperson talking about hamstring injuries, and it's like, this isn't teaching me anything. And I think a lot of the younger guys are clamoring out for people who do that, have that on the ground experience in gyms, how to do stuff. And I've been, for instance, I've taught plenty of seminars and stuff talking about hand supported split squats, super maximal methods, because nobody's teaching that stuff, and I've learned most of it by observing people who are better than myself, and or just experimenting, with the athletes I work with and on myself. And I think there is that real lack of practical applied approaches, which is why I'm going to plug a product here, which is why the video instructional I did, most of the time it's all PDF instructionals, right? I did a video instructional with a company called Technically, and we did a thing called practical strength training for grapplers. And most of the focus was on, here's how you actually perform a stagger Zerka good morning. Here's how you perform a snatch grip Romanian deadlift. Here's how you perform a floor press. And people seem to really groove with that stuff, because I think, it was put together in a very structured fashion, that narrative fashion that made sense. And the other thing, they felt like they weren't just watching another dude on YouTube just telling them how to perform an exercise correctly. It's coming from I guess, someone of authority who's worked with a number of different athletes. And I think the part of the problem is, you've got some dork on Instagram teaching you how to do X, Y, and Z. And most of the time, a lot of those guys are doing it wrong too, and it's like, well, where are these sort of barbell craftsmen? What have happened? Where have they gone? And this is something I think my friend Carl Valley at Simply Faster is part of the reason why I think he likes me writing articles for them, is because I'm still very focused on the craft of actually lifting weights, but not being constrained by strength sports, if you know what I'm saying. It's not powerlifting, it's not Olympic weightlifting, it's something else. And it's the fact that, well, at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is apply stress in a meaningful fashion that leads to adaptation, but I'm not constrained by my attachment to, say, powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting or whatever, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That last point that you made about, being able to, it's not powerlifting, it's not weightlifting. Yes, we might use some of the power exercises from weightlifting to get a response, get a stress response from there. Obviously, we might use some of the squatting and deadlifting, which are powerlifting movements, but I've used just squats. It's still a squat. It's not a powerlifting squat. We're just using that movement to be like, right, this is what we need to get from there. And I think from people who are trying to get these certificates, get these badges, that right, we're going to implement a powerlifting program to get someone stronger. Yep. Going back to that, all roads lead to Rome. Yes, they're going to get stronger, but I think that a common theme throughout everything can kind of come in full circle from everything that we've chatted about, is just asking questions, being able to be like, right, what's the baseline that we need, what is the demands of the sport, because in terms of programming, people will know, but being able to ask questions, say, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure on this, and looking at it to help from there. And as well, I think it is because it made me laugh or made me think that when you said, right, how are we going to actually coach somebody to do something? I know for me, I may as well said a speech trying to coach the first clients that I started speaking to, because you want to give them as many cues as you can, whereas actually I know it's one of those things that gets said a lot, but probably you end up saying less as you start coaching and developing. But it's not going to happen straight away. You don't get your degree, you don't get your strength and conditioning certificate and then be like, right, I've got all the answers, right, bring on the athletes. And especially through everything, yes, and I'm sure the content out there on the exercises side of things will be there's still things to be learned there, but I think there's still the skill of coaching and developing that skill set of questioning and trying to learn things and develop as a coach. So quite a few tangents thrown in, but some good conversation on there. But from everything that we've chatted about, sort of the last question, if you like, is from what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening, either from a coaching point of view or an athlete's point of view, for everyone listening?
I guess it comes down to one fundamental thing, and I think it's very pertinent in this day and age, is trying to be more authentic. And that's, there's only, I know it's cliched, but there's only one of you. And I think, we're very guilty, and I've probably done it before, and other people do it as well. And it's basically being very performative in this day and age, saying and doing what you think are the right things to say and do to get attention or to get noticed. And then what that can devolve into is what we call audience capture, where people start basically playing to the crowd that they've started to establish. So this is where we wind up with people, either saying outrageous things or posting stuff that's like wacky, sexy, whatever it may be. And they wind up gravitating away from what it is the essence of what it is they're trying to achieve. I've said before that what happens is you go from having a message to the media becoming the message, rather than conveying it is what it is that you mean. And this last year, particularly with COVID, everyone's staring at their phones nonstop now. It's worse than it ever was before. I think that's one of the things that mark this out more so than ever, is that more eyes have been on phone screens more than ever before. And unfortunately for many people, guys who've just finished uni, for instance, sports science degrees or whatever, they've walked out into a workplace that's not there. It's been put on hold for now. They've turned to their phones and then trying to build an image or a reputation or something. And the question you've got to keep asking is, well, am I being authentic? Don't get me wrong. You've got to build an audience, and you've got to be able to try and answer questions, questions to people's problems, but paying for a sponsored video of you doing crappy deadlifts isn't going to help you get anywhere, and it's a case of perhaps being open and honest, and something that if you are just you bring your enthusiasm, you bring your energy, and you bring the ability to ask questions and try and solve problems for people, and that's something at all levels that we're trying to do. It doesn't matter if you're 20 years in the game or just starting out, and and that comes with just being your authentic self, and people will respond to that better than anything else, as long as you're intellectually honest and open, and people will gravitate towards that, rather than trying to convey something perhaps you're not.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good way to finish on. And it does come down to being, especially because the back end of the chat we were speaking about, obviously working with people, and if you are in the business, which everyone wants to earn money and all that sort of stuff, but if you're in the business of working with people, you need to be able to build relationships with people. You need to be honest with them, and I think people can, especially in person, can see through that a little bit more, or even maybe not just in person but online, just being trying to sell something, trying to put something out there that's crazy, and then expect people to be, oh well, this is completely different, so this must work, this must be the plan from there. And I think sometimes people can, especially with because the social media side of things, obviously you can type in coach and anything will come up or anything like that, and it's just filtering out that information, and not kind of selling your soul to get those few extra followers or views. I think there is still, going back to it, that skill of coaching and actually putting out useful content that's going to benefit the coaches or athletes that may be following you. So a good point to finish on. And if anyone's got any questions about what we've chatted about, or if people want to see the content and information that you're putting out there, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Sure. So probably the place I use most is Instagram at the moment. So at powering through, all one word. And then if you want to reach me on Twitter, it's WS Wayland on Twitter. And then I've got a pretty quiet channel on YouTube that I should probably use more if I had to. It's just the video editing just slays me. I don't do what I do to be a video editor. So that's PWR through, I think, because somebody had already taken powering through the audacity. So but Instagram and Twitter are probably the two best places to reach me at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome. Everyone listening, 100%, check out the work that William and Powering Through do. I know from seeing the content, it's made me think a little bit more, and there's some good things on there where you think, okay, yeah, am I actually getting people to where I want to be? So thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Really, really appreciate it and enjoyed chatting with you. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.